Kia ora, bom dia. My name is Hugh Bigsby. I'm Dean of the Faculty of Agribusiness and Commerce at Lincoln University in New Zealand. Today I'd like to provide some reflections on the theme about global learning, global citizens, although looking through the list of questions that have been provided by the conference organizers, I think most of what I want to talk about relates to the other two questions as well. It's useful, I think, to provide a bit of context for what I'm going to talk about. First, by providing a bit of personal context for who I am. For those of you who can differentiate English accents, you'll be able to tell that I'm not actually originally from New Zealand. I was born and raised in Canada. I lived for a little while in Nigeria while I was in high school, while my father worked for the Canadian International Development Agency. I ended up doing a PhD in Melbourne, Australia, and I lived and worked there for about 6 years and ended up marrying an Australian. I've got 3 kids, one born in Australia, one born in Canada, and one born in New Zealand. So well-traveled, and that provides a bit of an influence on how I think about things. I'm a forest economist by education, and I think one of the key things that's influenced my career and the way I think about things is when I first moved from Canada to Australia to start my PhD, and I switched from being an expert in boreal forestry and significant winter and cold temperatures to living in a very temperate environment in Australia, and was really struck by how the same scientific principles and business principles and theory that we used in Canada ended up being applied very differently in Australia, due to different climates, different institutional systems, different historical settlement background. And so they ended up with quite different forest management systems and approaches using the same basic science as what I had learned when I went to university. And for me, this really highlighted the importance of understanding context, particularly in an international context, if you're dealing with people from other countries and systems, and the importance of being able to have a skill set that allowed you to take the principles and that you understood, be able to go and look and observe and listen and understand how those same principles were being applied and worked in a completely different context. So I guess for me, global thinking is a bit in my DNA. It's how I've lived for the last, decades. And it's also really had a big influence on how I've approached education. So that's me personally, but I also think it's useful to highlight something about New Zealand in the context of being global. And, for those of you who are aware of New Zealand, 2 small islands in the South Pacific, somewhere east of Australia, basically 10 to 14 hours flying to everywhere except the east coast of Australia. So it's a long ways from markets. But it is also a highly trade exposed economy. So relative to a lot of economies in the world, New Zealand relies on trade. Something like 30% of its GDP comes from trade with the rest of the world. The other interesting thing about New Zealand is a significant proportion of what New Zealand exports is in what we call agri-food or primary sector products, meat, wool, wine, milk, forestry things. And about 70% of all merchandise exports, things that have been manufactured in some way, have something to do with agri-food or primary sector products. So New Zealand is a highly focused, trade is very, very important to the economy. Understanding international markets and consumers is vital to the New Zealand economy. The other thing about New Zealand that influences the way people think about things here as well is it's a very open economy. It has virtually no barriers to imports other than what they call the usual technical barriers to trade, things to do with safety and health. So, you know, you have no interest in importing somebody else's pests and diseases or things that are going to melt and cause fires. But other than that, no tariffs, no quotas, no restrictions. It's a free and open economy. And as a result, New Zealand also has a very big focus on free trade agreements and multilateral institutions and agreements, and a big focus on global institutional arrangements that facilitate free trade, dispute resolution. You know, when you're a small open economy, you've got nothing but moral suasion really behind you to help, you know, push the case for being allowed to trade. So when we think about New Zealand globally, myself personally, having a global outlook and an ability to engage in some way globally is very, very important for Kiwis, New Zealanders. And so this need to be global has influenced my approach to education. I've been in Lincoln for 26 years now. And for the last 7 or 8, I've been dean of a business school, and using this kind of background influence to try and focus the university and our faculty on how we do things. So our long-term strategy for quite a while now has been to provide an international perspective for students so that when they graduate, they'll be able to carry that international perspective with them in whatever career they end up in, whether it's offshore or onshore. Because of the importance of international trade to New Zealand, your chance of bumping across something that has an international perspective is very high. There are really 4 strands to the way that we've approached this. One is trying to ensure that students get to sit in a class on our campus with international students. The second one is that we run international summer school programs of 4 to 6 weeks to take students offshore. Like most universities, we have student exchange programs, which are 1 or 2 semesters in other countries. And we're also involved in jointly taught international programs. And I'd just like to talk to each of those points briefly. For our university, being international and having students sitting beside you who are international is relatively easy because about 40% of our students on campus are international, have been for a long time, from 60 different countries. And more than 80% of our staff were born outside New Zealand. So we have a highly international teaching staff. We also have a highly international student cohort. So this means for us having an international mix on campus has never really been difficult. Our greatest difficulty has been leveraging that international exposure on campus so that we get something really interesting for students that reflects international. I personally have been taking students offshore on summer school programs of some description for more than 20 years, mostly into Asia, Malaysia. But in the last 5 years, our ability to run international summer school programs has been hugely enhanced by something called the Prime Minister's Scholarships for Asia and for Latin America, which is administered by Education New Zealand. This particular program funds students, so if they want to go spend a semester or a year or do a whole degree at another university somewhere in the target countries, the scholarship will fund that. They also run programs for groups of students, and that's what we've been really leveraging. In the last Southern Hemisphere summer, so for you, those of you in the Northern Hemisphere, our summer is December, January, February. So we run summer schools through those periods. We ran summer schools into South Korea, China, Thailand, Indonesia, and to Brazil, anywhere between 4 and 6 weeks. For us, all of these programs are agribusiness focused, so we are partnering with universities in those countries that have an agriculture, agribusiness focus. And our students go on a program where they're required over the period that they're in country to come up with a new import or export idea based on us exposing them to businesses, to going out to farms, doing cultural events, cooking classes, mingling with local students, so getting a feel for the people and the culture that they're in, and trying to identify unique things in that country that might be of interest in New Zealand, but as well also looking at things that are produced in New Zealand that might be potential export products into that market. We have had a lot of success with this particular program, and a lot of students are really keen on it, and it's really helped us to build long-term relationships with universities in these countries that we visit. And that's a really important part of it. We don't want this just to be something where we're tourists. For us, this is a really important program for regularly going to a host university, spending time with them, and for us, helping to build long-term relationships which leverage into student exchange programs, joint research, and potentially even joint courses or degrees. That's the kind of the long-term goal. In terms of exchange programs, like most universities, we've got a whole network of universities where students can spend a semester or a year. New Zealand is somewhat problematic around student exchange. The history here is that students do something called the Big OE, overseas experience. So instead of going away for 6 months while you're an undergraduate student, the tendency here is you wait until you graduated and then you go away for 2-3 years on working holidays and work your way around the world and travel and then come back and start careers. So we really struggle to get students to spend the same airfare money to go away and for 6 months, but we work on that one. The last of the points that I raised was about international joint degrees, and for me, these are the really important things. I think that the university system globally is ripe for a bit of disruption. We're still operating a model that started, I don't know, 1,000 years ago, where everybody went and hung out in one place with experts and reflected and did stuff. And we're now in an era where technology and ability to travel has greatly expanded the potential for university programs and courses to be global. And so, like many universities, we're already involved in those kind of things, mostly in China, where we've got joint degrees, but also a joint program into Australia. So, coming back to the globalization and COVID, for me, eventually we'll get over this. I've got the nice backdrop behind me. In reality, I'm sitting in a bedroom in the back of my house like I have for the last 4 weeks while New Zealand's been on total lockdown, staring out at my back garden. But in this process, my university and many universities around the world have switched from a traditional face-to-face model to what we're calling emergency remote teaching. And we've started to teach, well, we're teaching everything online now. And one of the things that has really struck me right now is that every single course that we teach is now being taught online. And we in essence, are building a platform for being able to collaborate with universities around the world to provide educational experiences for students, irrespective of where they happen to be located, so independent of travel. And so, you know, when I look at the big impact that COVID's had on, the key thing for us is ensuring that we don't backslide into face-to-face teaching once this emergency goes away, and we actually use this to leverage becoming more online, more global through our ability to connect with students and other researchers and staff around the world through these systems that everybody is now starting to go onto. And this gives us way more opportunities than we would otherwise when we, you know, normally our kind of joint programs involve significant time sitting in one location. You travel somewhere, you spend a semester, you spend 6 weeks, that kind of a thing. And we have the potential for doing something quite different. You know, so for us, like I say, we're running joint programs in China, delivering online. Normally, we try and have a bit of face-to-face with those. That's all stopped for the time being. Same into Australia. We've been in conversations with the Federal University of Assosa about having programs available in English so that we can expose our students to Latin American agribusiness. And, you know, again, this provides the opportunity for doing one of those kind of things. So I guess to summarize, I mean, I just sort of see around the COVID thing, I mean, Lincoln University, where I'm from, is global. It's been operating internationally in some way or another for a long, long time. And I see the current environment right now as providing kind of a fundamental shift, as long as we don't treat it as a temporary replacement for face-to-face, and that this is actually the significant shift where university education is finally going to break its 1,000-year shackle and start to look really different based on our ability to use technology to provide experiences. So I look forward to potentially working with some of you in the future remotely I'm recording this on Zoom, which I gather a lot of people are learning how to use right now as well. So kia ora and have a good day. Bye.